Thanks so much, Kelly. I'm so excited to see so many people at this session. And I want to start, first of all, by thanking all of you for the really important work that you do. My name is Amy Hirsch. I'm the managing attorney for the Health and Independence Unit at Community Legal Services. And today we're going to be talking about a number of public benefits issues with a particular focus on survivors of domestic violence or sexual assault and families with kids, although not exclusively families with kids. And for some reason, I'm having trouble making the slides advance. A quick overview of today's training. First, even though the title of today's training is around benefits from the County Assistance Office, we're also going to talk about two other things. The first is the expanded child tax credit, which people get from the IRS. That's incredibly exciting and I think really important for us to talk about. Then we're going to talk about benefits from the county assistance offices, in particular TANF and SNAP. And then SSI benefits from the Social Security Administration very briefly, but just as a reminder to keep them in mind. And I'm not, just as a heads up, when we talk about county assistance office benefits, I'm not talking much about Medicaid because there's a separate Medicaid training. And I'm not talking about LIHEAP and energy assistance because there's a separate utilities training. I also want to briefly mention right now a number of things that are benefits from the county assistance offices that are pandemic specific, not ongoing benefits. And just give you a very brief bit of information about those right now. So the first is SNAP emergency allotments, and actually I'm going to talk more about those when we talk about SNAP, but people get them automatically. There is not a separate application process. The second is pandemic EBT, which I hope people are familiar from at least a little bit from last year and from coverage in the news. This is funding that is meant to replace the free school meals that kids were unable to access while school was virtual. Because of various delays at the federal level, the emergency allotment of the pandemic EBT is just now going out in Pennsylvania for the school year that started last September. So people are now getting lump sums, they're getting them automatically. It's really important for parents who receive free school lunch to make sure that their school has their correct address in order for them to receive those benefits automatically. EMA coverage, even though there's a separate Medicaid thing, I wanted to just mention this. EMA stands for Emergency Medicaid. It's Medicaid for people whose immigration status does not allow them to get regular Medicaid. They can nonetheless get emergency Medicaid for emergency medical conditions, so urgent and serious medical conditions. And Pennsylvania has a really good policy, actually as a result of advocacy by my colleague, so that EMA covers COVID testing and diagnosis and treatment. So that's really important to keep in mind if you're working with individuals who may not have an immigration status that would normally allow them to access Medicaid. And then there's a new thing called the Pandemic Emergency Assistance Fund. These are funds from the federal government. It's about $27 million that's coming to Pennsylvania. It's going to be paid automatically later this summer. Again, there is no application process. We don't have all the details yet, but it looks like families will probably get approximately $500, and it will be paid through EBT cards to families that are families with kids that are already getting SNAP and have no income, and to the lowest income Tanf families. And when we have more information about that, when the details get nailed down, we will send information out through Plan to let everyone know about that. So the expanded child tax credit. This is incredibly exciting. The US has had a child tax credit that people could access through filing taxes, but it has been limited to families with earnings, and it has had more benefit available to families with more earnings. And that's meant that it was completely unavailable to the poorest families that have needed it the most. For 2021 only, this has changed. Excuse me. And I'm going to talk more about both the current details of it and a little bit about the advocacy to make it permanent. So for 2021, the total annual amount for children who are under 6 is $3,600. For children who are ages 6 through 17, it's $3,000. It's fully refundable, which is a tax term that means that families can get the full amount even if they have no earnings, no income, no tax liability. And it's partially advanced. And what that means is that some of it is getting paid in advance, that people don't have to wait until next spring when they file their 2021 taxes, but they're going to be able to receive part of it during 2021. The projections are that this should lift about 4.1 million children out of poverty in 2021, which is, of course, very exciting. So here's the advanced part. Families will be able to receive monthly payments from July through December of 2021. Those payments will be $250 a month for each child for children ages 6 through 17, and $300 a month for children who are under 6. If you do the math, those monthly payments for July through December add up to half of the child tax credit for this year. The second half will be available to families when they file their 2021 tax returns next year. So a couple things I really want to stress about this. There is no earnings requirement. There is no minimum income requirement. Kids must have a Social Security number. The benefit is not currently available, unfortunately, to children who just have an ITIN. Kids must have an SSN, but parents can claim the benefit for their child if the parent has an ITIN or an SSN. So the kids need to have Social Security numbers, but the parent can have an ITIN. It is not too late to file taxes now. We did a big push to get the word out, encouraging everyone to file taxes for 2020 by May 17th. And a lot of people think that once the tax filing deadline has passed, they can no longer file. You can file taxes at any point. And if you don't owe taxes, there's no penalty or anything like that. So people should still file taxes in order to access the child tax credit. And the child tax credit does not count as income for any federally funded benefits. So it will not affect people's ability to get SNAP, TANF, Medicaid, SSI, subsidized housing, YHEAP, any federally funded benefit. The child tax credit will not count as income. So there isn't a separate application process. The way that you get the child tax credit is to file taxes. So I know I sound like a broken record, but I have heard, for example, from clients who get TANF who don't have earnings, that they think that they're not allowed to file taxes, that not only have they not been required to file taxes, but that they're not permitted to. And that is not correct. They can file taxes, even if they don't normally file taxes, even if they have no income, and it's not too late. In Philadelphia, you can get help from the Campaign for Working Families. There's an online process through getyourrefund.org. I don't know whether VITA sites in other parts of the state are still open, but I'm hoping that that's something that you all can check on for your own locality. The IRS is going to set up what it's calling a non-filer portal. The phrase non-filer really resonates in the tax world. As someone who isn't a tax attorney, it doesn't particularly resonate for me. But what it means is someone who hasn't filed taxes. And they did a similar non-filer portal for the economic impact payments, the stimulus payments. And people had a fair amount of difficulty navigating it. We are hoping that the new non-filer portal to access the child tax credit will be somewhat easier to use. And they're also setting up a separate portal for people to report changes. So that if there is a change during the course of the year in terms of where the child is living, or other information relevant to the child tax credit, hopefully there will be this separate portal to report those changes. And we have heard that they may also set up a tool on the IRS website to help people find out whether or not they're going to get the child tax credit, and if not, what they need to do. We've also been told that although it has been really difficult to get through to the IRS by phone, that they are going to have greater phone capacity with meaningful customer service for this. We've heard different rumors about when the non-filer portal will be available. We were hoping it would be available at some point this month. There's a chance it may not be up until the first part of July. And I can't currently provide information about the details of using that portal to claim the child tax credit because we haven't seen what it actually looks like. But our colleagues from Philadelphia Legal Assistance and my colleague Jen Burdick at CLS will be doing training once there's more information. So who's eligible for the child tax credit? There's no minimum income. So our clients are certainly eligible in terms of income. If you're interested, for people who are higher income, the adjusted gross income in 2021 has to be under 150,000 for people who are married filing jointly, 75,000 for single filers, and there's a phase out above these levels. Again, doesn't affect our clients, but may be of interest. The 2021 child tax credit is going to be sent automatically by the IRS to anyone who filed for 2020 taxes claiming children. Or if they haven't filed for 2020 taxes, they're also looking at 2019 taxes. So people who have already filed taxes for 2020 or who filed for 2019 should be receiving the child tax credit for children that they claimed. This slide gives you information about which children can qualify, what the required relationships are. It can be a son or daughter, including an adopted child, stepchildren, stepbrothers, stepsisters, half-brothers, half-sisters, foster kids, grandchildren, nieces and nephews, or a direct descendant. So for example, if you're caring for your great nephew or your great niece. The child must be born by the end of 2021 and must be under age 18 as of December 31st, 2021. There are requirements that are still in effect from the old child tax credit that didn't change, which are that the child must be living with you for at least half the year, and that you have to provide at least half of the child's support during the last year. So we want to encourage everyone to help families claim the child tax credit. There are 3 different things that we want to encourage you to do. First is spread the word. Anytime you're doing community education, any family you're talking to, any client that you're assisting who has children, please, children living with them, please talk to them about whether or not they filed taxes, and if not, encourage them to do that now. You can help connect them to VITA or other tax filing help. And you can help them access the IRS non-filer portal once it becomes available. And I want to stress that connecting people to tax help and helping people access the non-filer portal is not tax practice. It's not representing someone in a tax dispute or acting as a an accountant or filing somebody's taxes. And the IRS made that clear with the portal, the non-filer portal for the economic impact payments. There's also ongoing child tax credit advocacy. Remember, I said this is just for 2021. So people are going to get these monthly payments, and then unless Congress acts, it's going to disappear. So there's a lot of ongoing advocacy to make the expansion permanent and to make monthly payments permanent, to make it simpler for non-filers, to ensure that there's meaningful IRS customer service, that people, ultimately, we would like to see people being able to receive the child tax credit through data matching. So for example, if the state has information for families that get SNAP or Medicaid or Tanf, we would like to see an exchange of data with the feds. That's a long way away, but there's advocacy to try and make that happen, as well as to try and make similar data exchanges with the Social Security Administration work. We'd like to see eligibility expanded to include children with ITINs and children who change households. So currently, if a child lives in 3 different households over the course of the year, and none of them are for 6 months, then the child is not eligible for the child tax credit. And so what that means is that the lowest income families whose lives may be the most complicated, and the children who may have the greatest need for the child tax credit may not be able to receive it. And then finally, we're all very used to Goldberg versus Kelly due process requirements concerning public benefits, notices from the county assistance offices, notices from Social Security, and an appeal process connected to those notices. And the IRS tax system is very different. And there currently is not a similar timely notice and easy way to access an appeals process in place. And we are trying to get that established going forward as well.
Amy,
So,
if it's okay, I'm going to launch the CLE poll box right now. This is for attorneys requesting CLE credit for your participation. I will leave this open for 2 minutes. And we do have a question if you want to take that now.
Yes, that's great.
Says, when you say, quote, access, unquote, the non-filer portal, do you mean completing the actual portal form? Meaning we could complete the portal form for the client without engaging in tax filing?
That was true for the economic impact portal. The IRS said that helping people complete that did not constitute providing tax representation. So we are expecting that it will similarly be a straightforward process that doesn't constitute tax representation. Again, it will be really helpful to see what that portal looks like. But the goal with that portal is to have something that's very straightforward. For anyone who has earnings, they should not just complete that non-filer portal because they're potentially eligible for the earned income tax credit. And they should be referred to a VITA site for help filing an actual tax return. Are there other questions connected to the child tax credit before we move on to benefits from the county assistance office?
Yeah, you can watch it at home.
That was the only question that we have right now.
Okay, great. So benefits from the county assistance offices. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm going to talk a bit about SNAP and about SNAP. I'm sorry, about TANF and about SNAP. There are separate trainings in this series on Medicaid and on energy assistance and utility issues. So I think people are probably generally familiar with the most common benefits that people can get from the county assistance offices. Cash assistance, which are cash benefits for very low income families. SNAP, also known as food stamps, which pays for food and is available to most low income households. And medical assistance, which is health insurance coverage, again, for most low income households. So cash assistance in Pennsylvania, at this point, the only people who are eligible for cash assistance are families with minor children living with them that are related kids. So if you take in your neighbor's kids or your friend's kids, you may be doing a really important service to those kids and those families, but you cannot get TANF for them. You have to have children to whom you are related, and people who are pregnant. The program is called TANF, which stands for Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. We used to have a program called General Assistance, which provided cash assistance benefits for people with disabilities, and for children who were being cared for by people they were not related to. And also there was a specific category for survivors of domestic violence. General assistance was eliminated in 2012. It was reinstated as a result of a court case that colleagues of mine at CLS brought, and then eliminated again in 2019. And there is another ongoing court challenge. So while we continue to hope that we may be ultimately successful in that court challenge, at this point, there is no general assistance in Pennsylvania. TANF benefits have not increased since January 1st, 1990. And normally when I talk about this, I ask everyone who's present at the presentation whether there's anyone who was born after January 1st, 1990. And with every year that passes, of course, a larger and larger proportion of folks have been born after January 1st, 1990. And during those more than 30 years, cash assistance grants in Pennsylvania have not increased by 1 penny. And they were not generous to begin with. So currently we're at about 22, 23% of the federal poverty line. I think the most important thing that I want to stress right now about this is that related caregivers, people who are caring for a kid who are not parents can get what's called a child-only grant. So grandparents, for example, or aunts or uncles or older siblings could get TANF for their grandkids or their nieces or nephews or their younger sibs without their own income counting. So if a grandparent who's employed or has Social Security or VA benefits is the relative who's caring for the child could get a grant without counting the grandparents' income. For people who are receiving cash assistance, there's a 50% earned income disregard. So if you've got a large family or an extremely low wage, extremely part-time job, you might be able to continue getting some TANF. Family members who get SSI don't count, so they don't get TANF, and their income and savings don't count, their resources. So a mom or dad who gets SSI for themselves can get TANF for their kids. And if they've got a child with disabilities who gets SSI, the rest of the family can get TANF, and that child can continue to get SSI. The first $100 a month, if there's one child, or $200 a month if there's 2 or more kids, that's collected in child support does not count against the TANF grant. And so that's called the support pass-through, and the family can receive that support in addition to the cash assistance. So if I'm a mom with 2 kids and I'm getting cash assistance $403 a month, and support is paid for one of my kids, and that support is $200 a month, I can get a total of $603 a month. Even though the support is only paid for one child, if there's 2 or more kids in the household, then up to $200 gets passed through to the family. The resource limit for TANF is $1,000, which of course makes it extremely difficult for people to accumulate any savings. and that resource limit hasn't gone up in an even longer period of time. I want to mention a couple of other Tanf rules that can make it really difficult for people and can really feel like barriers to participation. There are work requirements unless the adult is exempt based on disability or needing to take care of a child with a disability, or if they have other good cause. They can still volunteer. So for example, if someone wants to go to school and get their GED or take ESL classes or go to community college, even if they're exempt or have good cause, they can volunteer. And if they volunteer, they can receive special allowances for transportation and childcare, a payment to cover the GED, test fee, and help for books or tools or other stuff that they need for education or training or employment. There are sanctions for not participating. It's extremely important to appeal these. 3 sanctions result in a lifetime ban on getting Tanf, so it's really critical to appeal. There's also a child support cooperation requirement. There's the child support cooperation requirement often discourages families from participating in Tanf, and we're advocating with the department to try and get a broader definition of good cause and to have some additional exemptions from the child support cooperation requirement. But as of now, it is still in effect. It's got a 25% penalty for non-cooperation. So one possibility for a family that does not qualify for any of the exceptions, but really does not want, does not think it's in the kid's best interest or the family's best interest to pursue support, the family can just refuse to cooperate and take the 25% hit. So the grant would be reduced by 25%. Given how incredibly small the grants are to begin with, it's very difficult to take that 25% penalty, but it's better than getting no assistance at all, often for a family. The exceptions are for domestic violence, or if the child was conceived as the result of rape or incest, or if, in the case of a very young infant, if the parent is considering giving the child up for adoption. Although there's a separate form for rape or incest, we really urge not using it. There is no reason why someone should have to disclose to the county assistance office that their child was born as a result of rape or incest. Rape and incest both fall within the definition of domestic violence that the department uses, and the domestic violence verification form can be used for any kind of violence that someone has experienced or which is threatened. I've already talked about the support pass-through. So a couple of points during the pandemic. I should have mentioned earlier, the county assistance offices have been closed for over a year now to the public. There's discussion about reopening them at some point over the summer. While the pandemic has been going on, the department has recognized that participation is not possible in the welfare to work programs for most people. So they have been excusing people who need to be excused. They have, however, not automatically lifted sanctions that were previously in place. So if someone's Tanf was previously cut off because they didn't cooperate with the welfare to work program before the pandemic, it's really important to assist them in getting that sanction lifted now, so that they can get back into the TANF program. They are presuming child support cooperation while the courts are closed. I should say normally when someone applies for TANF, there are some counties like Philadelphia that have a waiver so that people are electronically referred for child support to family court from the county assistance office. But in most counties, at the time of application, people are told that they have to go to family court to start the support process before their TANF application will be processed. During the pandemic, while family courts have been closed, no one should have been told that they have to go to family court in order to get their TANF started. As courts reopen, we anticipate that the department will start enforcing that requirement again. And in a minute, I'm going to talk about TANF and domestic violence and the good cause waivers, but I want to stress here that anyone who has experienced domestic violence or who feels that pursuing support would endanger them or their kids should not be required to go to family court as part of the TANF application process. They can assert good cause at the time that they submit the application and not be required to provide additional information about the support, about the other parent. During the pandemic, interviews are happening by phone rather than in person. We have seen this be a real barrier for our clients who don't have consistent cell phone service. While for many people having an interview by phone may be less difficult and less intrusive than having to go to the county assistance office, for the people who have the least in resources, it has often been helpful to be able to walk into the county assistance office, and the closures have been extremely difficult. So TANF and domestic violence. The county assistance office can excuse victims of domestic violence. And I should say, I normally use the term survivors. I'm using victims here because that is the term that the department uses, and it's the term that's in the federal law about TANF. So domestic violence victims can be excused from TANF rules, including the work requirements, child support cooperation, time limits, other rules if necessary. And the way that you get excused is by completing the domestic violence verification form. So in the materials that Kelly has sent out to you, one of the things that's in there is a copy of this form. Feel free with any of the materials, of course, to reproduce them, to hand them out. But the DV verification form is particularly important. It's less complicated than it appears. And I have not succeeded in making this bigger while sharing my screen. I apologize about that. At the top, you fill in the person's name. It asks for their case number, but which is a number that begins with a 2-digit code for the county. In Philly, it's 51. Each county has a different 2-digit. And then there'll be a set of numbers for their county assistance office record number. If the person doesn't have that number, if they don't have any prior notices, you can fill in their social security number or their date of birth, just something to help the county assistance office know whose form this is. Then it asks you what things you're asking for good cause for. So what rules are you asking to have waived? And you then fill in, so if I was going to Kelly for help, it would say, I, Amy Hirsch, request to have the following requirements waived. And then it's got boxes to check for the most common things. For support cooperation, for what they call reset, which is the work requirements, And then it's got a box for other TANF or CCIS, subsidized childcare requirement. And you can fill in whatever it is. So for example, if you have a client who's being told that they need to provide their kid's birth certificate and they left in a hurry from an abusive situation and they don't have it, you can ask to have that requirement waived. And the county assistance office can go ahead and process benefits and agree that you'll provide a copy of that later when you've been able to replace it. And the range of what can be waived is really very broad. Then there are 3 different ways that the person can prove domestic violence, and you only need one of them. You don't need all 3. So the first is if, and it's the blue shaded area here, if the family has any documents. So if there's a police report or a protection from abuse order, or medical records that show that the person, for example, has a broken arm from an assault, you can check that box and attach the records and you're done. If you don't have records, don't worry, you don't need to have them. Or if the person has records but really doesn't want to share them. For example, if someone was assaulted and they went to the emergency room and they've got the medical record showing that they had a broken arm and a sexually transmitted infection, and they feel that that is just a bridge too far, it's too personal, they do not want to share that information, fine. The second way that someone can prove domestic violence in this context is what's called self-affirmation, verification by a third party. And that's this yellow section. And if I had gone to Kelly for help, we would have said, I authorize Kelly Yeckley to complete the form below. And then I, the client, sign and date it. And then Kelly would have filled in her name, her title, her work address, and she would check that she's a legal representative. If you look at the form, there is no human being who could not complete this form for someone. There's a provision for it being a friend, a relative, an acquaintance, a domestic violence services provider, a medical provider, anyone who has any knowledge of the person's situation can complete it. And the 2 key things are that the client has to give permission for the person to complete the form by signing it in the yellow box. And then the person completing the form has to fill in their information and sign and date it. And someone just has to have disclosed to you that they have experienced violence or a threat of violence or abuse. You do not have to have been present or to have all the details or anything like that, as long as you believe them. Then for someone who is either so isolated that there's no one they can ask, or for a situation where everyone knows that there's abuse, but everyone is too afraid of the abuser and no one will fill the form out, the person can self-affirm, and that's the green box down here. The county assistance office is not supposed to go behind this form. They are not supposed to be asking for details. They're not supposed to be asking to see bruises. They're not supposed to be asking people a lot of questions about what the abuse was or what occurred. And they are not supposed to be asking for the name or contact information of the abuser ever. One thing you will see about this form is it very deliberately does not ask for the name of the abuser, and it does not ask for any detail whatsoever about the abuse. And that was absolutely intentional. in order to ensure that the process of completing this form does not further endanger someone or does not act as a barrier to someone who has experienced abuse or the threat of abuse from receiving help. A couple of really important pieces of information. One is that domestic violence in this context is the department's shorthand for any type of violence or threat of violence. So domestic violence is the most common type of violence that becomes an issue in the context of benefits, but it could have been assault or abuse by a stranger, a neighbor, an employer, a colleague, a friend. It doesn't matter who the abuser or the assailant was. It includes sexual assault, and it includes any type of violence or threat of violence. It's really broad. It's very different from the requirements for getting a PFA. So before I move on to SNAP, are there any questions about Tanf?
Amy, we don't currently have any new questions in the chat. If you don't mind, I will take this minute to launch the second CLE poll box, if that's okay. Attorneys,
Absolutely.
please respond for CLE credit. It will be up for 2 minutes before I close it down. And Amy, feel free to continue. Thank you.
Okay. The one other thing I want to add about the the domestic violence verification form is that it officially only applies to TANF or childcare subsidy, but actually the department has said that whether it's SNAP or Medicaid, for any type of benefit that the department issues, if there's an issue connected to domestic violence or other violence, and the person needs to have a rule, a provision waived or an application expedited in some way, that the department will, on a case-by-case basis, look to see what they can do to help. So even if what the person is applying for is just Medicaid or food stamps and not cash assistance, if there's been domestic violence or other violence, it can really be helpful to submit the DV verification form and to ask for whatever help you need or your client needs. So SNAP benefits. Almost everybody who's low income is eligible for SNAP. I'm going to kind of zoom through the SNAP slides because of our limited time, but I want to stress that it's really perplexing that although we are still in the pandemic and Medicaid enrollment has remained high, SNAP enrollment has been decreasing and TANF enrollment has been decreasing. So we think what's going on is a lot of paperwork barriers and issues that people are having in getting paperwork timely submitted. But I really want to encourage you, if you're talking to anyone who isn't getting benefits, who's potentially eligible, to encourage them to apply. So SNAP currently is 15% greater than it normally would be. So through September 30th, 2021, the grant amounts are 15% higher. So for one person, for example, it's $234 a month in SNAP because of the pandemic. There's something called SNAP emergency allotments that I want to boast about because along with colleagues at CLS and with a fabulous pro bono team from Morgan Lewis, we litigated the denial by the Trump administration of emergency allotments to the lowest income households who were receiving SNAP. The USDA had bizarrely interpreted the federal statute to say that you could only get emergency allotments, additional SNAP, extra SNAP during the pandemic if you were a higher income household getting SNAP. They kind of turned the program upside down. So we settled that case on March 31st. Going forward, as long as the pandemic continues, at least $95 a month per SNAP household in emergency allotments. For SNAP households that are getting less than the maximum regular allotment, they can get more than $95 to get them up to the maximum allotment. Households that are getting the maximum or close to it are getting this $95 additional. And there was $712 million in special SNAP emergency allotments to cover the period from September 2020 through April 2021, only for Pennsylvania because of this litigation. The policy was changed nationally by the Biden administration once the case was settled. And it's about $1 billion a month nationally in emergency allotments for the poorest households getting SNAP. So we are extremely grateful to Morgan Lewis for their assistance and very, very proud and excited about this. I also want to mention very briefly Expedited Snap. People can get Expedited Snap within 5 days of application if they have very little cash on hand, or if their shelter costs, including their utilities, are more than their monthly income and cash on hand. And because Pennsylvania automatically gives everybody, counts for everyone as though their utilities are about $580 a month, pretty much everyone, not absolutely, but most people who apply for SNAP are eligible for Expedited. People will need to complete the process for ongoing SNAP. A lot of times people get their Expedited SNAP for the first month and they think, oh, they've been approved and that they don't have to follow up with the rest of the application process, but they do. So for SSI benefits, I just want to mention very briefly that SSI is based either on being 65 or older or being disabled and low income. It's got a higher resource limit and higher income limits and pays higher benefits than TANF. People automatically get Medicaid and they get a small state supplemental payment. So for anyone who's 65 or older, often we see people who are getting a small amount of Social Security. Maybe they're getting $500 or $600 a month in Social Security, and they're oddly not getting SSI. So unless they have resources that would put them over the SSI resource limit, they should be applying for SSI. Social Security Administration does not treat an application for Social Security, disability, or retirement benefits as an application for SSI. You have to explicitly say that you want SSI. I want to very briefly talk about appeals. So our motto is appeal now, think later. And it's really important because the appeal frames are really short. The time frame that people have to get an appeal in is short. And often by the time someone comes to us or to you for help, they are at or close to the deadline. So just get the appeal in. You can always withdraw it. You can't make things worse generally by appealing. And appealing has two benefits. One is it gets you a neutral decision maker if you're not able to work things out with the county assistance office. And the second is it gives you more time to get proof. Under the hearing rules for county assistance offices appeals, you can submit proof that the county assistance office wants at any point up to the hearing. So if the issue is that there's some paperwork that's needed, you can get that paperwork in as long as the appeal is pending and potentially get benefits back to when you applied depending on what the issue was. So the appeal deadlines, generally to keep benefits coming, there's a 15-day deadline. During the pandemic, that has been extended to 90 days for Medicaid. So during the pandemic, if someone is receiving Medicaid and they get a cutoff notice for their Medicaid, they can appeal for up to 90 days and they can continue, they can ask at any point in that 90-day period to have their benefits reinstated. The clock starts ticking on the date that proper notice is mailed. So looking at the postmark of the envelope is incredibly important. We have often seen mailing delays. And it's also really important that it has to be proper notice. So if you have a client with limited English proficiency, sending them notice in English is not proper notice, and they should be able to get their benefits reinstated. If someone is newly applying, they're not entitled to have benefits paid pending the appeal, but it's still important to appeal. Appealing is really easy. The notices have an appeal page. We have a blank appeal form that was included in the materials. Be sure to keep a copy. It's really important not to give them your only copy of anything. If we were mailing an appeal and we would mail it certified, our clients generally can't afford that. We urge either turning it in, and the county assistance offices have drop boxes, even though they're currently physically closed to the public, they do have a drop box. Normally when the CAOs are open, it's possible to get a receipt for turning in the appeal. So it's noon, we're just about out of time. Does anyone have any questions?
Amy, unless they are typing them in right now, I don't see any questions in the chat box.
Okay, so everyone should have received the PowerPoint and a bunch of different handouts. Feel free to reach out to me if you have questions. And again, thank you so much for your time and attention and for the work that you do.
Thank you, Amy, you as well. We appreciate you being here for us. Very helpful, good information. Have a great rest of the day. Take care.
Bye.